Right, okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're very pleased to welcome Judith Devlin from Morgan Sindall, who will be delivering this session today. I'll shortly hand you over to her, but before I do so, I just want to mention a few things. Firstly, for those of you who haven't attended one of our IOSH webinars, I'm Ben Pollard and I take care of the technical aspects of these sessions. So if you have any problems at all, I should try to assist as best as I can. On your screen then, most likely located at the top left-hand side, you'll notice a small bar with some written options on them, which are chat and Q&A. If you have any technical issues or audio problems and you need to message me at any point, please use the chat option. If you have any specific questions for Judith relating to the content of the session, please use the Q&A option and ask your questions here. I'll run through all of these with Judith after her presentation is finished, and we will aim to tackle as many of these as possible. If there are any questions outstanding when the time is up, we will look to provide written answers to those following the webinar. So with all that said, I'll now hand you over to Judith, and I hope that you all enjoy the session.
Good afternoon. I'm Judith Devlin from Morgan Sindall. I am a training manager, health and safety lead on our Edinburgh to Glasgow improvement programme and Stirling, Dunblane and Alloa programme up in Scotland. I've been with Morgan Sindall for 3 years, and I became involved in fatigue early on last year within Morgan Sindall. So I'm sure you all know, but just to give you a reminder, fatigue is different from drowsiness, so a needing to sleep. It can be described as a lack of energy and motivation, both physical and mental. And given the current push within our industry for health and well-being, I think that fatigue ties in neatly to both mental health and physical health and well-being. So tackling fatigue is one of the core issues for Morgan Sindall at the moment. So this afternoon we're going to go through the reason that we decided in Morgan Sindall to look through fatigue as more of an issue for us. We're going to look at some accidents and incident statistics, the solution we came up with, how we've been measuring it and the results we've had, and our strategy for going forward. And then, as Ben said, I'll answer any questions at the end. So fatigue has been seen by Morgan Sindall as one of our key risks. This is within our rail business. It's been highlighted through its inclusion as one of our top 5 risks. We had a series of incidents and accidents on our Edinburgh to Glasgow improvement project, our Egypt project, and we noticed a correlation between these and the teams that were working the 6 night shifts per week. None of the incidents had fatigue listed as a root cause, but our Morgan Sindall senior team highlighted that fatigue was likely to be involved in it at some point. So from this slide, you can see that overall we had 65 incidents, of which 45 occurred on night shift. And we had 14 accidents, of which 11 occurred on night shift. Now, as I said, there was no root cause mentioned in the investigations as being fatigue. However, when you look at our shift patterns of 6 continual night shifts per week for our guys, it's likely that fatigue was an issue. So what we decided to do was in early 2017, we commenced a fatigue monitoring scheme with 100 people on our Egypt project. And we used a fatigue prevention company called Fatigue Science. A bit of background on Fatigue Science: they're based in Canada. The technology that they use has been developed from the US military. They currently work all over the world with sports teams, construction teams, heavy industry, including mining, and they still work with the military. Within rail, they've worked with ourselves, they've worked with Castaigne, although not in the rail. I believe that was with their mining projects, and they've been involved in Crossrail. So the initial pilot programme that we ran equipped our staff with ready bands. If you see the picture on the screen, the ready band is the small band at the side. We ran the pilot for 30 days to establish some baselines and for some trends to use across the business. The bands have now been updated to the picture that you can see now, which was following some feedback from our team plus other teams that the original bands didn't have any information. They now display the time and the battery levels and all that kind of stuff. The ready bands use movement and algorithms to monitor and predict fatigue. So they don't monitor anything except sleep patterns. They don't have GPS in them. They don't know when where somebody is. They don't know what they're doing. All they know is if somebody's awake or asleep, which has helped us combat the kind of big brother issue that we had on site for a lot of the individuals that were asked to participate in the pilot. They thought it was us just wanting another way to monitor people and see what they were doing, but the bands can't do that. So we coupled the trial with a programme of education on fatigue and medical interventions where they were required. The medical interventions were completed by an occupational health provider that we had on site at the time. And the things for medical interventions they were looking for was if sleep apnea was an issue, or insomnia, or there was any other underlying medical issues. To the best of our knowledge, this is the first time that a positive correlation has been demonstrated between worker fatigue and accidents in the rail environment based on scientific data. The other thing to mention about the bands is that they provide feedback to the users via a phone app, which is displayed on the screen as well, meaning individuals can self-educate on their rest patterns and their fatigue state. I'll tell you a bit more about how the scoring and all that kind of thing in the app as we go forward. What the education looked at was educating the individual on how much you need to sleep, when you need to sleep, and how important it is the time of day that you sleep. So it's recommended that an individual gets between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per day. Ideally, they should be awake during the day and asleep at night, which comes into the time of day, and you should try and get your 7 to 9 hours in one block. Now, obviously, for night shift workers, that creates its own issues, which is what we've done through the education part of it. I mean, we've kind of given them some hints and tips on how they can get better sleep. So, a bit more now about what information we actually got out of the pilot. So, the bands give us an alertness score that starts at 100, with 100 being the best, and it goes right the way down to 0. 70 is when a state of fatigue is when an individual enters a state of fatigue. And it's believed that when we hit 70, it's the same effect as being drunk behind the wheel. Now, we know that through our partners at Fatigue Science have told us that every night shift worker will hit a state of 70 at some point during their shift. It's kind of impossible not to, because of the very nature of being awake at night and sleeping during the day. But given that we don't allow people to drive, we don't allow people to work under the influence of alcohol, why would we then let somebody work when it's the same effect that they're having? You can also see how much the reaction times are slowed between somebody who's got a score of 100 to somebody who's got a score of 70. And it's like being awake for 21 hours. So that's the scoring mechanism that exists. The scores do go right down to 0. However, once they start going below 70, that's when we need to start taking actions. So these were our initial results from our pilot. We had 3 groups that we grouped our 100 people into 3 different groups. We had days, we had nights, and we had a combination of days and nights. So this is our day people. This is office staff who are based at our head office. You can see we didn't have any major issues there. Everybody was getting an average sleep duration of 7.1 hours. The average safety score was 90, and we would expect for day shift Monday to Friday workers that their safety score would be in the kind of the high 80s up to 100. When we then go to the night shift, so this is our permanent night shift staff who work Saturday through to Thursday, sorry. You will see that almost 36% of those who were at work were fatigue impaired, with some in the extreme range, so their score had actually dropped to 45 or below. They were getting an average sleep of less than 6 hours a day, and their score, although on average was 80, we had some day shift workers involved in that bit as well. So if I relate that back to the earlier slide about accidents and incidents, we had 79 in total, 56 of which at night, but no fatigue is a factor. But then you look and we see we've got 36 of people on duty who are fatigue impaired. So before we had this kind of data, all we could do to monitor fatigue in terms of accident and incident reporting was the HSE Fatigue Risk Index and a system we use called Datascope, which monitors working hours only, and so does the Fatigue Risk Index. So while we knew that we weren't making people exceed their working hours, we didn't know what they were doing when they went home, and this is why we use the fatigue science data, because this actually tells us how much sleep those individuals are getting. Just by comparison, we've then got the site where we had a mixture of day and night shift. Again, we didn't have any massive problems here. The average sleep duration was just slightly below the 7 to 9 hours, but our scores were okay. We had a small percentage, only 4% on duty, that were fatigue impaired. And we think those are related to those who worked Monday to Friday day shift and then did a Saturday night, or worked Monday to Friday and then maybe had a long drive home to their place of rest. So a lot of our workers, although they work in Scotland, they maybe stay down south. So it's that travel home at the end of it. So we then decided to implement a fatigue intervention strategy. What I should say, sorry, before I move on, we had one individual that was singled out by fatigue science who actually dipped down to a score of less than 30 at one point. They were having an average sleep duration of less than 3 hours a day. Their average score was 53, and fatigue science told us that the score of under 30 was equivalent to being up to 7 times over the drink drive limit. And when we looked at what time the actual score was, it was at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it was when he would be travelling home from his shift. So we actually identified the individual and we found out the root cause for what was happening, and we spent some education time with him, but that was a major concern to us, that we actually had somebody that hit such a low threshold, especially when driving home at the end of a shift. So this is when we came in with our intervention strategy. Our first thing is to eliminate the most extreme occurrences of fatigue with daily predictive monitoring. So when the bands are synced with either the app or we can have iPads on site, it gives us a predictive score, a predictive monitoring. Predictive monitoring allows us to see up to 12 hours in advance when somebody might hit a state of fatigue. So it doesn't just tell us the information at the time, it tells us what's going to happen 12 hours into the future. So we can make decisions if somebody started their shift, that they're going to hit a state of fatigue maybe at the end of their shift. We can arrange for time for somebody to take them home and things like that, which is why this information is quite good, because it can give us predictive information as well. We established cease work threshold for day and night shifts based on their risk tolerance and the impact to operational continuity. I can show you a bit more about that in some of the ongoing slides. We developed a fatigue intervention plan with intervention tactics tied to specific score thresholds, so depending on whether they hit 70 or 60 or 50, for example. And a lot of what we're doing is providing training and change management support to supervisors and workers to capture and evaluate the feedback that we're getting. The individual gets the feedback on their app, so they can see their score, they can see how much they've slept, they can set goals to make their things better. They can also access it through the website, which gives them a bit more detailed information. They can download reports on themselves, they can actually see their predictive score as well. So it's providing all this information and getting the individual to look at it. We've set KPIs relating to the percentage of what we want to get to in terms of where our fatigue levels are for our safety critical staff. We've identified our safety critical staff as the first people that we need to get involved across the Morgan Sindall rail business. They're engaged through the scheme, they get training provided, they get health consultations, they can access their own data, as I mentioned, through different ways, and it's to get them to make a more informed decision on their own fatigue. I think a big part of this for me is to almost push back to the individual and get them to take the responsibility for their own fatigue. We can say you don't work more than 12 hours, you don't work more than 14 hours door to door, but it's up to them then to get the necessary sleep that they need to make sure they're rested and fit for work. We've reworked our fatigue management plans to include this intervention plan. And at the moment, we've rolled it out over 4 projects, and we want to make it rolled across all our projects. So every new project that comes live on our system will then implement the fatigue bands on it. As I said, our initial target wears our safety critical staff, and we've also just decided to include our drivers. So anybody who's driving more than 2,500 hours per month will also be targeted to wear a band. So we decided to include the drivers because we've had a couple of road traffic collisions and fatigue has been an issue in them. So we've decided to add our drivers in with our safety critical staff. So these are an example of our intervention points. These are when we have extremely or very high fatigue. So if somebody's hitting this level, it's what we're going to do. It's either providing an opportunity for an on-shift nap, removing somebody from the duties. It might be that if we see they're going to dip below the 70 at the end of their shift, we might get them driven home by somebody else rather than driving themselves. When we remove them from duties, we might just remove them from the safety critical duties depending on the level of their score, or it might be that we send them home completely. This is going to be a major change in it is a major change, in our business, and it's something that we've been preparing our clients for. So Network Rail and London Underground are our main clients within the rail division, and we've been telling them that this could affect works and it could affect operational output. But with the knowledge that we now have, we can't let people still continue to go to work. So we have different strategies to implement depending on the individual scores, as I mentioned, depending on whether they're at 70, they're at 60, or they're below 50. Currently, it states there's a person in charge. That isn't the same person in charge for everybody who's involved in safe systems of work and safe work packs. It's not that same person in charge. It's our supervisor or our delegated person on site can check when everybody comes into site. As long as the bands have been synced, he can go onto the iPads that are there, or he can go onto the internet and look and see what this predictive monitoring is telling us. Currently, there's only a selected few in the business that can do this and have access to this data. We will be adding more people, but we need to make sure that we identify the correct people and that we provide them with training and information on how they take these interventions and how we manage these interventions on site. So the idea is that effectively we'll improve our fatigue risk profile by supporting workers to get better sleep. We will use occupational health staff to use the analysis dashboard to identify anybody who's chronically fatigued to be screened for medical disorders. Currently we'll use an external provider for that. We have an occupational health provider that we use, but it may be in longer term we bring in OH staff to look at it. We are also supported by this from Fatigue Science. They will help us look at this. We're providing individually guidance and fatigue management trainers for our workers. So this is through Fatigue Science and the app. They can send out personalised emails. They can send out, they can upload things to the app for that's managed to the individual. The big plus for us as well is Fatigue Science are based in Canada, so they're awake when our workers are awake and out working. Because of the time difference, they can do one-to-ones, either video conferencing, or they can email people and text people and give them back feedback if they want it. Everybody who gets a band gets the app enabled to them, so it's just sent to them via email and they download it to their phone. The workers can monitor their own sleep and fatigue and improve their sleep behaviours. That's, like I mentioned earlier, they can set goals, they can look at it themselves. We had feedback from a number of people when we were doing the pilot that actually seeing their scores drop made them make the decision to get better sleep and to improve their sleep patterns. So, since the pilot, we've now rolled this out across the company, and this is just some data on our full implementation so far. So day shift, we don't have a massive issue, as you would expect. We still have some issues, so any education and training that we do is not just for our night shift workers, it's for everybody in the company. And it's not just for those that are wearing bands either. We give the same information out to everybody, because we at the moment, we don't mandate that everybody has to wear a band. We encourage them to wear a band. So our belief is that we need to provide the same information to all, whether they're wearing a band or not. What you will see, though, is that we still have quite an issue on our night shift, especially for our supervisors. So 36% of our supervisors are still hitting a state of fatigue. And I know within the rail industry, and I'm sure yourselves will have the same issues, there's been a big spotlight on supervision and supervisors and what they do. So our big concern is that if 36% of our supervisors are in a state of fatigue, how are they actually managing the works when they're out there? How are they able to make the right decisions, make the decisions within the right time scales and everything, because their reaction times are slowed. So we'll be targeting our supervisors. You'll also see that our safety staff are hitting quite a high level of fatigue. So this is primarily down to the fact that our safety staff, some of our safety staff work the same shifts as our night shift staff. So they're on permanent night shift, they're doing 6 shifts a week. But if we need, obviously there's a concern that our safety staff are higher risk as well. So we need to see how we can work it so that their scores are coming down as well. So what else have we done? We've updated our business and project level fatigue plans to include the use of ready bands for all safety critical staff working nights. We've developed an intervention strategy based on levels of fatigue being shown by the bands, and we're using the data to review shift patterns, travel times, and to develop a programme of education and medical support. We're also looking to tie this in with driver telematics. It's something that I've been discussing with Fatigue Science, because if somebody's fatigued, they tend to drive more erratically, so there'll be harsher braking, harsher acceleration, and given we've had quite a lot of road traffic collisions, and fatigue's been an issue with them, it ties in with that, and it lets us analyse data. And whilst it also makes people safe, it can also be a benefit to the company in that we don't have as many collisions, we have smoother running costs on our cars, our vans aren't damaged, we have better fuel consumption, all that kind of thing. So we've also centralised all our permanent and agency resourcing to ensure that travel times are monitored more accurately at the point of allocating resource to projects. And our high-level strategy is to have no safety critical resource working in a fatigue state by the end of 2018, and to be able to demonstrate that this has been used through the ready bands. It's quite a big aim to have, but if we don't have big goals, then what chance have we got? So this is one of our KPIs that we're looking at. We've to eliminate the worst 5% of hours. So that's the kind of dark red you'll see at the top of the top left-hand side of the screen. And then originally we were going to reduce it to 20%, the fatigue exposure to 20% of total working hours, but we want it removed completely from safety critical staff. We recognise that there will still be states of fatigue, so we need to have a kind of guidance KPI in there. We're still at the start of this process and we're still trying to work out what's going to happen, but we need to try and aim for 0 across everything if we can. So what improvements have we seen to date? So across the current locations that we've got bands deployed on, we've seen a reduction from 10% to 8% in high risk scores. This was over October to December at the end of last year, compared to the previous 3 months. This has primarily been done through self-management and a bit of education. What you'll see here is the individual sites and how they've improved. So George House on the left-hand side is predominantly a day shift site. Cadder is predominantly night shift, and Lark Hall is a mixture of both, but with more sitting in night shift. So you see there's been a reduction across the board, although a greater reduction at Larkhall. So some of the other things that we're doing to help these improvements, we're doing a kind of relaunch. So we've got new sites coming on, and we've got people that have moved from one site to another and projects shutting down. And with the new bands coming out, we've decided to do a relaunch across the company. So everybody will get a new band, one of the new style bands, and any new users will go through an email orientation. They get some guidance, they get some education modules emailed to them. The new style ready bands don't require us to have iPads on all the sites, which is a big plus for us, because keeping them secure and things like that are not always easy. So we can deploy the bands and we don't need the iPads to do the syncing and things like that. The app is currently being developed with educational context cards, and these are tailored to the individual, and they can also be tailored to the business. So we can decide if we want to put out information on a certain part of fatigue, and we can send it out to everybody, and we can make it business specific, or we can make it generic. It's up to us, but we can have input into these context cards, which are then fed out through the app. We're going to be doing one-to-ones for individuals who want to speak to somebody about their levels and who want just a bit more information or a bit more learning about how to interpret the data and all that kind of stuff. Fatigue Science are going to do that for us through kind of webinars, and they'll do it remotely for us for when the guys are on night shift. We are currently promoting this to our clients, as I mentioned earlier, so Network Rail, London Underground, and anyone else that we work with. London Underground are really keen on it. They've not seen anything like this before. Network Rail have been really keen as well, especially because when you look back at what we've done with fatigue in the rail industry, we started the 12-hour and the 14-hour door-to-door almost 30 years ago, and we've not done anything since then. This is kind of the next step. We've looked at how we can stop people exceeding their hours, but we don't do any management of how often do they sleep, because we all know that we have individuals who maybe have another job, they're looking after children, so they're not getting the best sleep when they go home. Plus it's daytime, it's noisy, there's other things going on, they've maybe got errands to run. It's not as easy to get that sleep pattern that we do for the day shift staff. The other part that we're doing for just coming up next month is National Bed Month. So we've got some Z cards printed up, and we've got some sleep packs that will go out to everybody in our business that have just got eye masks in them, earplugs in them. They've got a notepad and pen, because it's recommended that if your mind's busy when you're trying to go to sleep, if you write down what you're trying to do, then you can then relax and get into that sleep pattern. For us, education is key to everything that we're doing. We need to educate the individual to take control of their own fatigue. We can make sure we don't ask them to work more than they should, but they need to look after their own sleep patterns and and ensure that when they come to work, they are not in a state of fatigue. It's not going to be a quick process, but we now have this guilty knowledge, so we have to do something. And I think that the rest of the industry need to come in and get involved and do whatever they need to do and how they can monitor this fatigue as well. The end point for us, we don't really know. There's been discussions that we'll maybe need to change our shift patterns. Maybe we'll stop this 6 shifts a day. If we look at the output that we get from the guys, perhaps we would get the same input over 4 or 5 shifts rather than 6. It might be that we need to stop works completely. It could be quite a painful process for us at first, but it's something that our MD is backing completely and wants to encourage across the business. And it's him that's selling it out to our clients and promoting it across the business as he can and across the rail industry as a wider project. So that's it.
Okay, great. Well, we've got a few questions that have come in following that. Just before we go through the Q&A, I am just going to quickly launch a very quick feedback poll. So it should appear on your screen now. If you could just take a few moments just to fill that out and send it back, that'd be fantastic. It's just so we can get a read on how these sessions go. So whilst you're all doing that, we'll go through the questions that have come in. So we're going to start here with someone who's asked, so the debate on fatigue management has largely centred on its role in accident causation. So should the fatigue debate embrace a more holistic approach by taking into account its impact on employee well-being and the wider organisation, as currently evidence on fatigue and worker well-being is lacking?
Personally, I think it should, Anthony. I know that the reason that we started on this journey was due to the fact that it was accident and instant causation. But for me, as my personal opinion is that this has a wider approach in it. That's why I mentioned at the beginning, it's all to do with, I think, the health and well-being of the individual. And it's something that in my role in Morgan Sindall that I'm going to be looking at to evidence if we can evidence that there's an improvement, if we improve fatigue for the individual, or if we can improve fatigue levels for the individual, that actually it improves their health and well-being as well. And it's something that fatigue science are helping me to look at, to how we can get that kind of data and analyse it, and it then becomes better for the wider business.
Okay, great. Someone here has asked, with respect to the training for supervisors and managers, has this been externally sourced, or has it all been delivery in-house?
The training for the supervising managers that we get is actually supplied to us from fatigue science. So they will train them on how they can analyse the data, how to do interventions, and we can... Usually when we deliver the training, there's a member of Morgan Sindall there and a member of fatigue science, so we do it as a kind of double-edged approach.
Okay, fantastic. Another one has asked, with regards to, are you monitoring door-to-door hours and travel time to comply with ROGS? And does this information cover working hours and travel time too?
So as I was saying earlier, we use a system called Datascope to do this. So Datascope monitors working hours and travel time for us. It's a biometric scan of a finger when they start on site. So when anybody comes on site, they put their finger on the scanner, it asks them their travel, have they worked anywhere else in the past 12 hours? It asks them if they're starting their shift, it asks them their travel time, and it goes up in hours and minutes increments. And then they do the same thing when they leave site. So that gives us our travel time and our actual working hours, and that's what we use. We provide that information to fatigue science to give us accurate analysis. That's how we know when people are at work when they're fatigued, rather than just being in a state of fatigue while they're asleep. Because if you look at the actual predictive, the monitoring, your levels dip up and down through the day, and most normal people will follow the circadian rhythm where their scores are high during the day and low during the night. But by providing them with the Datascope information on our working time and hours, we can actually see when somebody's fatigued at work.
Excellent. Okay, we've had a couple of questions with regards to the ready bands.
Yep.
So the first one is, are the ready bands worn 24/7, monitoring even during non-working days? And if so, how is that managed?
Yep, so the bands are worn constantly. They're waterproof. They don't even need to be taken off when they shower or if they go for a swim or anything. We can't, as I said earlier, I can't make people wear them, but we try to encourage the more a wearer wears the band. That doesn't make sense. The more someone wears the band, the more accurate the information. People can take them off. It just means that our information is not complete. They're almost like a Fitbit now. I wear mine constantly. I don't even notice I've got it on most of the time. But I can't make somebody wear it all the time. And if I'm going on a night out or if I'm going somewhere else, then I do take the band off. But when you go back in to sync your data, it just asks why your band's been off. So that's all.
Okay, great. Another one then with regards to the band. So, well, initially they've asked about the proportion of staff who are participating, especially those who are safety critical. More importantly, have you had any people who have dropped out of wearing the bands?
We've had a few. One individual came back to us. He'd actually contacted Fatigue Science himself because he wasn't getting a score and nothing was happening, and we found out that he actually moved too much while he was asleep, so the bands couldn't record any information. The bands work on movement of the wrist. We've had some people who on our earlier bands were a bit more cumbersome than the current ones, didn't like wearing them, handed them back. So as I said, we've not mandated this and we've not made it that everybody needs to wear them. So some people haven't enjoyed wearing them, some people have. And we've got people who've had them on now for maybe 3 months, 4 months, and they just continue to wear them. It's just become the norm for them now. So it's just getting over that initial kind of first couple of days, first couple of weeks hurdle that's been the problem. We have had dropouts, but nothing major.
Okay, great. Someone else actually started off by saying they wanted to thank you for a very interesting webinar.
Thank you.
What do you think is one obstacle which prevents equipment like the Fatigue Science Ready Band from being rolled out widespread as a normal part of what we do? And if such an obstacle does exist, how should we aim to overcome it?
I think the biggest thank you for your comment. The biggest obstacle we've had is the kind of the thought that this is Big Brother. And one of the ways we've got around this is when we've given the bands out to individuals, we've got Fatigue Science in to do it rather than Morgan Sindall doing it, where it can look a bit more Big Brother. We've asked Fatigue Science to do it, and I don't know whether they believe them a bit more than they believe us, but they've bought into it a bit more and they've been more prepared to do it. And I think with the current trend for apps and Fitbits and Apple Watches and all these kind of things, people are taking a bit more interest in their well-being and their health. And I think when we've been describing it is that people have been more inclined to be involved. I haven't had as much obstacles as I thought I would in getting people involved. The biggest obstacle I think that we're going to face is when we have to stop shifts, to stop people working because they are fatigued, and that's just something that we're going to have to weather and see how we get along and see if our clients are actually going to accept that we're prepared to stop work because individuals are not fit for work through fatigue.
Okay, great. I think you possibly already covered this in one of the previous questions, actually, but someone has asked the question whether you encountered a lot of resistance from the workers during the implementation.
So not as much as I expected. Before we delivered the presentations to them to kind of give them a bit of information about what we were doing, there was a bit, well, I'm not doing this. And then it tended to be how when we got one person to be involved, the rest kind of followed suit because they thought, actually, this isn't as bad as we think it is. So there was more kind of word of mouth. One night, I remember I went out one night to do an implementation and I think I got 3 people to wear a band. When I went out in the next night shift, I had a queue at my desk of people waiting to see the band. So there was that kind of peer influence as well, which helped, I think.
Okay. As part of the baseline improvement fatigue performance, were rostering principles reviewed? So, for example, the number of consecutive shifts or rest days, etc. And were any changes made based upon the fatigue data reviewed by the Ready Bands?
Okay. So, as I said, we've tied it in with the data scope information and the general roster that people would do, so the kind of 6 shifts, and that's when we split it into the days, the nights, and the days and nights. So that was taken into account when we were looking at our baseline figures. We haven't made any changes to the shifts and rest days at the moment. It's something that we're monitoring on an ongoing process. What I have agreed with our managing director, I had a discussion with him on Monday about it, is that it's the individual sites and projects will be able to decide if they want to roster in extra rest days for people, and that will give them what the best practice is. HSE best practice is that if somebody goes from nights to days, they should get 2 days off. So we're looking to see what we can do and if we can add in extra days. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the metrics I want to try and see is if we do take a shift off, so we don't penalise the worker financially, so they'll still get paid the same if they work 5 shifts as they would for 6. but actually, are we getting the same output, operational output from them? Because I think it probably will prove that we will get the same output.
Okay, great. There's a couple of people that have actually asked the same question here, and that's with regards to the bands. So what sort of costs are associated with the bands, if assuming you're willing to share, of course?
So the indicative cost that Fatigue Science give us is it's about £1 per person, I think, or is it £10 per person? The project to date has cost us £100,000. But when I split that down into the amount of people that we've been involved with and the changes that we're making, then it's not that much money, really. It depends on what you take from Fatigue Science. I can't give definites on what they charge.
Okay, great. In terms of your clients, what feedback have you received to date from clients?
We haven't got any official feedback from them. They're just keen to see what we're doing and monitor how we're going. They haven't put anything officially in writing to us, but the more information we can provide them, then the better.
Okay, great. Someone here has asked, can you advise how you manage infrequent workers? So, you know, for example, agency staff, and the fact that they have a lack of consistent attendance on site. Obviously, the system requires time to input the data prior to providing outputs.
Yep, so at the moment we are only doing this for Morgan Sindall staff. We are not including agency staff or contractors on it. It's something that we would like to roll out eventually and get our contractors and our agency staff involved. But currently we're only using Morgan Sindall staff. That's to do with data protection and our legal team at the moment, which we're looking at. But agency staff and the lack of consistent attendance would cause us issues, because when the individuals get a band, they kind of get attached to a site and they would need to stay at that site for a longer period of time to be able to do it, to be able to analyse the data properly.
Okay, and are you including your contractors in this programme?
So when we did our initial pilot, we did include contractors in it. Going forward, currently we are not including contractors, just as I mentioned there. We've got issues with data protection and our legal team, which we're trying to sort out just now. I would like to include our contractors in it because it gives us a better, well-rounded idea of what's happening on site, but currently it's only Morgan Sindall staff that we do it for.
Okay, great. Another quick one just with regards to the bands. Do the bands alert anyone? Have they got any kind of system?
So the bands don't do anything apart from monitor sleep. They've got the time on it. They tell you when your battery's running out and they tell you your name. But the app itself, the individual needs to go into the app itself to see if there's an issue with their score.
Excellent. Okay. Someone points out London Underground has previously done reports on this with Fatigue Science back in 2013. Projects, things like Crossrail and LU were both involved. Have you seen that the report? Have you seen that particular report, and does it tie up with the data you've collected?
I've seen the report from Crossrail. The Crossrail project that was involved was actually a Morgan Sindall joint venture. So I've seen the data from there, and I think what they looked at, I may be wrong, it might be a different report you're looking at, but the report they looked at was how shift patterns affected individuals. So it was if they were day shift, they were back shift, or they were night shift, and what they actually found that was the back shift was worse than the night shift. And they changed round the shift rotation, I think, to make that better. So they looked at the shift patterns rather than, we don't really have shift patterns. Our guys work either permanent days or permanent nights. So it was slightly different from what we did in our pilot.
Okay, great. There's one here that's, I suppose, related to data protection, really, and that is, has there been any personal data privacy issue raised during the communication with the staff on the use of the monitoring device? And if so, how has this been handled?
So the only personal data that we take apart from sleep is the individual's name and their email address. the individual can only see their own data within the app or within the Fatigue Science website. And as I said earlier, there's only a select few. Currently, it's actually only myself and the managing director that can see everybody's data in the company. And we've kept it that way for this data protection reason. We want to make sure that we select the right people and give them the right training. And we get each individual to sign a data protection form just to say that we're collecting information on them, because the sleep data is still information on them. But we haven't had any issues raised so far from anybody.
Okay, great. Someone here has asked whether you have tried to correlate fatigued individuals with mental health issues at all.
So that's one of the things that I want to look at. One of the new metrics that I want to speak to HR. I would like if we can speak to our HR department and see if we can identify if anybody who is having fatigue issues is also having either any mental health or well-being issues. Our data protection thing then becomes a bit more delicate when we start looking into HR issues. But even if I can look just now just at overall numbers about how many people we've got who have mental health issues and then states of fatigue, and we can start looking at more into it. We haven't done anything yet, but it is something I would like to do.
Okay, do you allow people to opt out, or will it be part of their contract, etc., to participate?
So at the moment, we don't mandate it to anybody. It's up to the individual whether they want to wear it, or we try to encourage everybody to wear it, but we can't make anybody do it.
Okay, great. And going back to the ready bands, can data be taken from any other types of monitoring bands, so Fitbits, for example, or anything like that?
It's not something we've looked into. I think this would be quite difficult. You could use Fitbits, I suppose, if you supplied them, but that information belongs to the individual, and it would be up to the individual to then share the information with you. And I believe from what I've heard, what I know about Fitbits and what I know about the Ready Bands is the Ready Bands are a lot more accurate than Fitbits are in recording the fatigue data.
Okay, this person said that they understand your MD is supportive of this, but if the change in shift patterns affect commercially viable viability of the project, so for example moving from say 3 by 8 hour shifts midweek or at weekends, how will you convince the client?
That's my MD that needs to do that. No, I'm only kidding. This is part of our education, not just with our workforce but also with the client, because I think it is important that the client has to understand that they can't expect us to put somebody at risk just to get an operational output. So it's a bit of education on both sides of the table at the moment that I think will be the best way to do that.
Excellent. Okay. Coming back to the bands then, are they driven by time data analysis rather than any physiological data at all?
So I think the answer to this one is the bands are driven by their movement. It's the movement of the wrist, so that it knows. I don't understand all the technicalities of it, but basically it knows when somebody's not moving their wrist as much, so they're asleep, rather than moving when they would be awake, rather than looking at that. I think that's the answer to your question, I hope.
Okay, great. Another one that's been asked again with regards to the ReadyBand scores, so do the ReadyBand scores indicate that the first day or night of a sequence of shifts is more fatiguing than the last?
That's not something I've asked Fatigue Science to look into. It's something I can ask them to analyse for me. So I can ask them to break the data down so that I would see which would be potentially our first shift back would be the Saturday night. If that's more fatiguing than the Thursday night, it's actually a really good question, and it's one I'm going to ask Fatigue Science to find out for me. And I can always provide a written answer on that one once I get the answer from them.
Okay, great. This is an interesting question, actually. So the person, first of all, thanked you for the webinar. They've asked, did you have any calls from the wearers telling you that they will not be coming to work because they've read the results of the band and this told them that they are fatigued?
Thank you for your comment. And no, we've not had anybody. I've had a few people tell me they're going to phone in and say they're fatigued, but we've not had anybody make the call yet. We actually had one supervisor who thought he was in a constant state of fatigue and he shouldn't have been at work, and he was complaining about it whenever he was at work. But actually, when we looked into his data, he wasn't. He was misreading his data, so we did a bit of more education with him on how to understand his data. And actually, for a night shift worker, his scores are really, really good. So I'm not sure why he thought he was so bad. But I've not had anybody phone me in and say, no, they're not coming in. But it is something that the sites will need to have to deal with. If an individual, for whatever reason, doesn't think they're fit for work, then they shouldn't attend for work, whether it's fatigue or it's something else.
Okay, great, thank you. Have you undertaken any costing of fatigue to your organisation, and how is the business case made for buy-in when it comes to investment in fatigue interventions?
We haven't done any costings on it to date. It'll probably be something that we look at. It was an issue that raised its head, and our MD was happy to invest in it. We were very lucky in that case. I didn't have to do a business case to bring the bands in. He was happy to do it and to see how we could develop it. No doubt if we want to spread it further out, I will need to do business cases and look at some of the costs that have been involved and its potential savings, which is something that I think we can do through the driver telematics and things that I discussed earlier.
Okay, great. How is, again, comes back to contractors, I guess. So how do you see this working with your subcontract workers who may be managed differently in regards to rest periods and distance travelled prior to and immediately after work?
So currently, our contractors and subcontractors abide by our fatigue management rules. We're not putting bans on any of our contractors and subcontractors at the moment, as I described earlier. However, we don't allow anybody working for us to travel more than an hour and a half at the end or beginning of a shift. If they do, then we mandate that they have to be put up in a hotel as a minimum, or we need to get somebody who's closer to the shift.
Okay, great. In terms of personal lifestyles, are employees' personal lifestyles reflected in the fatigue monitoring?
So, as I said earlier, the bands don't monitor anything other than sleep, so we're not really looking into anybody's personal lives. We do realise that there will be things that influence the sleep patterns of individuals, and that's where the education part comes in. And it's part of the education is the individual educating those that live with them and who have impacts on their lives to allow them to get the sleep that they need to come to work.
Okay, great. How are SCWs rostered for 8 hours or less on night shift? So meaning requirements of working time regulations. Is that something you?
Our safety critical workers are. It depends on the project and on the works that they're doing. All of our workers actually sign out of the working time regulations at the moment. We try not to make sure that anybody's rostered for more than 10 hours. It's not always possible, but in general, our guys will work 10 hours on their shifts.
Okay, great. With regards to the study itself, did it throw up any instances of people choosing to work overtime? How willing were they to forgo this to aid fatigue management?
We didn't actually include that in the study, so it just looked at the pure hours that they were working and the actual fatigue that was experienced during the work. So we didn't break it down into any overtime and things like that. This will be part of our strategies and our plans, in that people will still be able to work overtime if they want to, but they still need to be able to manage their fatigue within the current levels.
Okay, and what advice can you give in terms of, from a business case perspective, to justify the costs of the bans?
So I suppose that comes down to the individual company. You need to get a nice MD like me that didn't make you do one, or I mean, we use the bands. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to use these bands. There's obviously other things out there that you can use, and it's how you would do a business case for any kind of health and wellbeing project that you wanted to do that could show a tangible improvement in people's lives, and it does show an improvement in. We have shown through the bands that it does impact on people, and we are showing a decrease now in our fatigue levels while at work. So it's not an easy one, I don't think, to put ahead, but you would just need to show how it relates to your business and how a decrease in fatigue would improve accidents, incidents, and general mental health and well-being, I think.
Okay, great. Another one around contractors. Would you foresee your company only using contractors who adopt this technology in the future?
I'm not sure on that. I would think that we would encourage our contractors to use this technology. Again, we probably wouldn't mandate it. The ideal end up point for us is that we can give them to our contractors and we look after it for them. But I think as fatigue grows as an issue and grows as a way to resolve it, I think more and more companies will try different ways to monitor fatigue and look at it, and whether it's using fatigue science ready bands or it's something else, we would be looking for contractors to show us how they're managing fatigue, not just the door-to-door rules.
Okay. Would you agree that the supply chain are likely to be the biggest risk or challenges in terms of managing fatigue, and therefore they should be a priority?
I think we need to get our own house in order first. So we need to make sure as a principal contractor and as an employing, as we take on subcontractors, that we need to make sure that we're okay first. Not that we're okay first, but that we are doing it right first before we can then say that the supply chain need to do it. So I don't know whether necessarily they'll be the biggest risk or challenge. We've had a lot of our supply chain ask to be involved in the project and for their guys to wear the bands as well. And they're quite disappointed that they can't at the moment, but that's something that I'm looking to rectify. So I don't think they will be the biggest risk, but I think everybody's a priority. I don't think there's one more important than the other.
Okay, great. Coming back to the trial, do workers have the opportunity to self-identify that they believe they're impaired by fatigue, regardless of what the Rediband score says? And during your trial, did anyone actually identify that they may be impaired by fatigue during a shift where the Rediband score said that it didn't indicate a high risk?
I haven't had anybody come back and say that. We get people kind of kidding on saying, "Oh, I'm tired, I need to go home." And then I explain to them that tiredness and fatigue's two different things. But we haven't had anybody come to us and say that they believe they're in a state of fatigue, but the Rediband's wrong. So I haven't come across that yet at all.
No? Okay, great. Someone returning from a very relaxing break and starts his first shift may possibly register less fatigue. Would you say that was true?
So the fatigue data actually looks at averages. It doesn't, one day doesn't make a difference or 2 days doesn't make a difference. It looks at the average over a space of time. When you first start wearing a band, you don't get a score for 3 days because it needs to average out what's happening. So one good or bad day or a couple of good or bad days doesn't have an effect on the bands. So whether they've had a relaxing break or they've had a very stressful break, it shouldn't affect the fatigue bands too much in the actual scores.
Okay, great. We are coming to the end of the session, so we'll just take maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll have to stop there. But obviously, if you have asked a question that hasn't been answered, we'll get some written responses for you, which we'll post online along with the recording of this. So, one question that, again, comes back to contractors as well. In terms of the contractor data, what percentage of your safety critical staff would be contractors or agency staff?
So in the initial pilot, our contractor data was included. We did include our contractors in it. Now it's just as we've implemented it across the business, we don't include our contractors. Our safety critical staff split, I don't really know off the top of my head, but we do have quite a lot of our own safety critical staff we do hire in as well. So it's maybe about 40% in-house, 60% out-house. I don't know. I can find out and give a written answer to that one.
Okay, fantastic. And just one final one. Do Morgan Sindall now actually report fatigue as a root cause in investigations?
Yes, we should have always done it, is the easy answer. So it's now looked at in more depth, in the projects where the ready bands are actually deployed. It gives us that bit more information that we can look into as part of our investigation, rather than just the fatigue risk index that we complete, or the data scope issue the data scope data that we get. So it is now looked into more in depth in our investigations.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Judith, for that. It was a fantastic session. A lot of questions raised from it as well, which is great to see. For those questions that we haven't managed to answer, we will obviously put together some written responses, and we'll post them online for you. So don't worry if it's not been answered. Thank you to everyone for attending and getting involved. I hope you found the session useful, and thank you for sending back your feedback. That's really helpful. What I'll do is I'll leave the session open for another minute or so, just so that you can send in any final comments or questions you may have. And then I will end the session, so you will shortly get kicked out. All that's really left for me to say is, again, thank you very much, Judith, for coming.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to do so.
Excellent, and thank you all for listening, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you.